It's we met a couple of years ago. It's probably 3 or 4 years ago now, at a conference, and I felt just so excited and honored to be a part of a panel where I think we were talking about accelerating learning was the first topic, and I had no idea how our friendship would go, and just getting a chance to get to know one another, and it's been awesome. So, but before I get us launched, I want to just show everybody. Here's the book. So it just came out, and Veronica and our other friend Ken DeMuse, this is the book, The Age of Agility, and it's massive.
It's up on the bookshop.
It's up on the, yeah, and it's a pretty awesome. I'm going to ask Veronica a question about this in a second, because being the editor on a book like this is, you can imagine, and it's crazy, the authors, the thinkers that are in here who are a part of this, and then you've got Daniel and me. But it's just been like, and we feel so just truly honored to be a part of this. But Veronica, I wanted to set up like at the beginning of the book, and we're going to get personal in just a second. But you launch out the concept of the changing face of companies and organizations, and we've heard about this so much, about our VUCA world. But I think there's some really interesting things in terms of the shift that's occurring there. You also, in your first chapter, you launch into the changing face of the employee-employer relationship, which is fascinating, and then you get into the changing face of leadership. I want to suggest as we get going, y'all, that learning agility it's being thrown around, and agility itself is being thrown around a lot. In fact, Daniel and I were on a call this week with an amazing guy who's written 2 books about it that we didn't know about it. They're in the background, and so it's out there, but it's also something that is deeply, deeply personal. This is something that has a lot of nuance and a lot of movement around it, and so to that end, we're going to start personal. Here we go, Veronica. So I have in my hot little hands what's called our WiLD cards. So this is, and I realized there are 50 cards, and I picked out 20 of them just randomly. And so I want to start off, and I'm gonna. You knew I was going to ask, but you don't know what.
I knew you were going to do this. Exactly.
And the whole WiLD deck is really questions that kind of open up, learning agility. So it seems relevant. So you got to give me a number between 1 and 20.
I'm going to give you one of my favorite numbers, 6.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Here we go, everybody. This is the question Veronica's got to answer. She didn't know this. Are you willing to edit yourself for the sake of others?
Well, I can answer that really literally. I had to do it with multiple chapters where I had to edit myself for the sake of others in words alone. So being an editor kind of goes with the territory, but absolutely, I definitely edit myself, sometimes too much, sometimes not enough. I think the challenge is trying to hit that balance of staying authentic to yourself, but at the same time adapting to what other people need. So there's my answer.
Yeah. And it's so weird. It is so weird that the card I picked was the editor card.
It is. Yeah. You planned that. I think you must have planned.
There's
that.
only one card in 50 that has that on it. So okay. Now, will you pick a number for me? Because I said if I was going to have you do that, I have to do it as well. What's the number between 1 and 20?
I'm going to pick 9.
All right. What would you change if you were intentionally investing? What would change if you were intentionally investing in the growth and development of others? I've been thinking a lot about this related to the WiLD team. I think we practice what we preach, but I have specific targets for how I could do this better. And so I've been thinking about this a lot. What would change? First thing that comes to mind is clarity for them. I think if I was more intentional, they would have increasing clarity. So that's my answer. Thank you for being here with us.
I love those cards. I just love those. I've had so much fun with them when we've done them.
So, and it's interesting too that we didn't prep that, and it's fun to hear your responses. I know I did that to you the other day as well. So
yeah, it was an even harder question the other day.
Yeah. So let me start off with this. And this is not me leading this conversation, but us having a conversation, but I'll just set up the first part. I'm really curious, as you and Ken, and I feel this because the process of building a book like this, and I know many of the authors that were included. What was this like of putting together this book? What was that process of truly kind of trying to get the herd together to go in the same direction.
Uh-huh.
And I'm assuming we weren't the only ones who felt guilty along the way for not getting you drafts that were necessary. But so what was the process of this like?
Well, I can honestly say that it was 95% fun. I mean, it was something that I have wanted to do. I've wanted to write a book for my entire career. I didn't exactly know what shape that book would take. And but I think just knowing that was an intention I had primed me to see the opportunities, connect with the right people to have this, come to life. And I really owe a lot to Ken Demise because he had published before, so I had a built-in mentor along the way. But it was in some ways it was easier than I thought. I mean, I had set myself up that it was going to be really, really difficult. But I mean, I guess a learning agile habit that I deployed was leveraging experience that I had. I mean, one of the things I've done a lot in my life is manage projects. And in many ways, editing a book is rallying a team around a shared mission, a shared purpose to do something. And that in this case was really to pull together the very best thinking on learning agility, a concept that's really still evolving, but that we know is of critical importance in the world we're living in today.
Interesting. I have so many questions about that process.
Mhm.
How did you make decisions about whose voices to include?
Well, I mean, we were obviously we gravitated toward people we knew, we respected, that we knew were good writers, who were already thought leaders. But we were pretty intentional about trying to, reach out and see who we might we overlooking. We really wanted to make sure it was global. We had a few global authors. We maybe could have even had more. But Ken and I think we brought a diversity of perspective from the beginning because
Hmm.
he spent a lot of his energy on assessment of learning agility. And I have a personal passion around developing learning agility. And so, I think we brought a good blend of perspectives and a good network of people that between the two of us we knew. And I think we were really to some extent just lucky that the recipe all came together. And one of the things I feel kind of best about is that we've kind of formed a community of people who are interested in learning agility, and I hope that kind of snowballs and takes on a life of its own.
Yeah. So in this space, it's interesting. When I think about agility, and even contributing a chapter and realizing there's so many different voices speaking into this space,
Yeah.
it caused me to
Yeah.
have to think about how I define it, and
Well,
and
and
trying to.
I wanted to ask you about that because there are so
Yeah.
many different definitions, and that was one of the things we struggled with the book. Is that, in fact, in the last chapter, I think I had a table with about 16 different definitions.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was interesting because I'd been in this literature for a long time, as you have, but I also think
Mhm.
there's different language being used to describe what this is about. And so I'm a deconstructioner. I don't know if that's a
Mhm.
word, but I like to take concepts and then deconstruct them to their fundamentals. I started
Uh-huh.
thinking about the concept of agility. Like, what does that really mean? Because we throw these words around, but we don't
Mhm.
know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
And so I started thinking, and it immediately takes you into more physical agility comes up almost first, right? It's in,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I was fascinated by that concept of moving well.
Mhm.
And the agility is about moving well, not necessarily about moving fast, but that would be one form of moving well. And which got me into that whole space of when I talk about learning agility, it would mean, what does it mean to learn well?
Mhm.
And so that's where my brain kind of migrated as we were getting into this. And of course, my experience of this is really closely been tied to that connection, that link between experiences and lessons learned. And that's how my brain
Mhm.
first got into this, with Bob Eichenger's work years ago and Morgan McCall's work years ago.
Yeah,
But I
mine
think it's
too.
also interesting because the one of the things about that I also, that even preparing for this conversation got me thinking about is there's something in our cultural narrative that's fascinating. That whole concept of be who you are is fascinating to me, especially when you think about it related to learning agility, which I also might suggest includes the concept of learning who you could become. So, you know, and so it's not just like I'm locked in, but I have this capacity to become something I didn't really imagine that I might be able to become. But that concept of moving well is something that has been important. So let me put this back on you. So you talk about, you know, that's my definition, but it is, you talk about the core facets of learning agility. What are those facets that to give everyone a chance to chew on some of those things?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that made working on this book fun is that it was truly an exercise in learning for me. I came in with some knowledge of learning agility, but I had no idea how much I didn't know. And so I think one of the things that really emerged for me over the course of working on this, or maybe it crystallized for me, is that learning agility, and you're going to love this word, Rob, is very holistic. It really includes the whole leader, because in terms of the facets, I would say it involves how we perceive things and learning how to perceive things perhaps differently. It is about our emotions and being able to label, acknowledge, even control our emotions. It's about our thinking processes and being able to, you know, see the things that are filtering how we interpret our perceptions. And then ultimately, you know, it's about how that shows up in the world. How do we translate that into behaviors? But I think another thing that I learned from your chapter, Rob, is how important motivation is and really understanding what inspires you. So, you know, perceptions, emotions, thoughts, behaviors, you know, motivators or inspirations are I think some of the things that really stood out to me by the time I got to the end of the book. So they're almost like 5 different levels of agility within learning agility.
Huh. So and what did you just now name those levels?
Well, I not just now, but over the course of writing, actually chapter 19 was my synthesis of this. And I think that's when I really came to those conclusions. You'll see some of that in chapter 19.
Okay. Do you have
So,
those in front of you by any chance?
yeah. Well, the words.
I want to just name them real quick, because I know I'm looking at a
Okay.
couple of faces. People are wanting to chew on this. So what are those 5
Yeah.
facets?
Okay.
Or those levels?
Perceptions, how you perceive the world, your emotions, your emotional reactions, your thoughts, your mindsets about the world, how you then interpret that into action or behavior. And then 5th, and maybe this should be first, is what motivates you, what inspires you to change any of this. So
Interesting.
that's the 5.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So it's interesting.
And I know you talk a lot. I threw out the word whole there. You talk a lot about whole leader development. I mean, it's in the DNA of your name. How does this fit in with whole leaders and learning? How does whole leadership and learning agility fit together with this?
Well, it's funny. As I was saying, the thing that prompted my thinking about this, and actually one of my co-authors is here today, Dr. Tanya Boyd, and we did research on that linkage between experiences that we have and lessons that are available to us. And so there's been scientists across our field have wanted to understand, how do you unlock the gate between the learning that's available and the competency that I could develop as a leader, as a person, and the experiences that we know are teaching. And so it got us deep into that whole space of, there've been different names, put on this, whether it's learning agility, whether it's developmental efficacy, or even agency probably plays a role. And so as I was thinking, when I got deep into this, even the past few years, realizing that a lot of the work that we've done, and even the development of the WiLD toolkit, has been a process of an invitation to someone being more learning agile. And because when I think about that concept of moving well, or learning well, or even finding those lessons, or being able to track more easily to them, There is so much that goes into that we don't often talk about. So when you think about a whole person, and you think about your ability to learn well or to move well, I think about so many variables. This is almost like this meta construct that is affected by my own feelings of confidence or efficacy,
Absolutely.
by the community that surrounds me. Am I able to be agile if I'm not supported? Do I know for the sake of what or whom? I think I mentioned this in a conversation with you and with Ken the other day, is that I personally believe that learning agility is a neutral concept. That you could be learning agile and do horrible things. And so I think the question of learning agility for the sake of what or whom begs another question. So I'm not saying that this book is amazing, but I think we also have to be mindful that a whole person also has that part of it is their capacity, my own capacity to do damage as well as good with that increasing with what I learned. And so I think that what's fascinating about the variables in psychology from a whole perspective is just this, is that I realize I've spent most of my career building a system and a process that would invite that possibility of being more agile, but I wouldn't necessarily always use that language that includes all those multiple variables, that might even include partly personality, that some of it might be predicted by what I was wired for.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's thank you for asking, because that my brain goes there. I'm a natural kind of integrator, sometimes to a fault. So I appreciate that. So let me ask you this. So given that, what is it that I wrote this down, so I want to be clear about my question, is that sometimes, like, even as we're discussing it now, I think the concept of learning agility can be sort of this thing in the clouds that can feel quite complex, quite nuanced, and difficult to wrap our brains around. Are there simple models that you could share with us about becoming more learning agile? I know we both have opinions about this, but I don't know what you're going to say. Yeah. And so what would you suggest?
Well, I'm with you, Rob. I think sometimes I'm getting an echo. Is that from my system or no?
I'll turn mine off and see if it helps.
Okay. Well, anyhow, in the process of working around learning agility, it can seem very complex. And I don't think we want to oversimplify it, because we want to dig in as researchers to the nuances. But when I'm working with leaders, I find it helpful to have some simple models that are easy to remember. And again, going back to the definition of learning agility, I think the definition I like the best is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. Now, obviously, there's kind of a paradox in that, knowing what to do when you want. No. So when you're in those situations, I like to think about, 5 sets of behaviors. I call them the learning agile behaviors. One set is observing. Second set is doing. Third is connecting. Fourth is thinking. And fifth is mobilizing. And you're going to see some of those.
So stop. You got to slow down so Claire catches those. Because I know people are wanting to track to those.
Sure. And I'll dive into each one a little bit. So observing is about taking the time to pause. This includes the idea of mindfulness, being aware what's going on in the environment, being able to even look out into the future. I mean, to be learning agile, if you wait until the moment you need to learn something, you're probably already behind. So observing means observing down the road to know what you need to learn in the future. The second category is doing. And that's, experimenting, is trying things out, sometimes big stretch assignments. Sometimes it means taking baby steps. This sort of bucket of behaviors inevitably takes courage. And in fact, the other day, I was working with someone on their development plan, and one of the learning and development people said, "Does this plan make you uncomfortable enough?" If there was no discomfort in the plan, then it probably wasn't a good stretching plan. So it's about practicing, and it goes beyond. Sometimes people think, oh, books and all that's not learning from experience. I tend to think that if you can pick up the right book or the right YouTube video, that you can learn some lessons from other people's experience and that it prevents the trial and error. So doing includes that as well. Connecting. This is learning from other people. It's the mentors, it's the support network, it's the being willing to ask for help. It's the whole social dimension. Thinking includes reflecting. It involves stepping back and really looking deeply at our assumptions. I think this is the one that's most challenging because those filters can be so invisible to us. But I think one of the easiest, not easy, but maybe one of the most tangible ways to do this is to try to ask questions from a learner perspective versus constantly judging or evaluating things. And then mobilizing, I think this is what touches on some of your thinking, Rob, about, what motivates people. But if you're going to go on a journey of learning something, it won't all be fun and games. Hopefully part of it will spark some joy, but there are going to be places along the way where it's hard. And so we have to find things that inspire us, that keep us on track, that help us manage our emotions, that help us know when to go through cycles of renewal. So I know I probably added a lot of complexity there, but if people find themselves in situations where I don't know what I need to know what to do because I don't know what to do, then thinking about observing, doing, connecting, thinking, believing might at least, jog some starting points.
Okay, you just blew my mind because I told you where I might go next if we had, and I want to get this conversation going, but this, and it's one of the contributions of our chapter was this realization I had several years ago as we were doing research on this, that this connection between learning and motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And really thinking deeply, studying what motivates people to learn. And I never until just now had this eye-opening, right? What you just described was very, very closely aligned with those learning motivators. And I good, because here was my big aha, is that sometimes we talk about learning agility as just go do all these things, go think all these things, go try all these things. And what I got really interested in this concept that we are motivated to learn by different things. That actually motivation to learn and agility itself, that we have differences. So like with football players, I don't know what I think about football players, but if we don't know football, you assume that everybody has the same kind of agility, but some football players move well with their hands, some move well with their feet. And so, and it's funny mapping our 6 motivators in the motivational learning inventory is we have seeker, strategist, connector, influencer, stabilizer, and receptor. And they actually map very closely onto those things you just described. And I just think it's interesting as all of you are listening is to realize that every person in whom you're invested might be motivated to learn and be agile in different kinds of ways. That is fascinating to discover. And thank you for that. I want to get the conversation going. And Veronica, I'm so grateful for you. It's my dear friend.
It's mutual.
And all that. So let's get the conversation going.